I can confidently say, over the last 3 to 4 years, as a musician, engineer, and producer, it has been virtually impossible to deny K-pop's growing influence and presence in Western popular music. And with me constantly jamming out to BTS's latest single, Butter, I thought what better time to do a deep dive into some of the history as well as theoretical background of K-pop. I first remember hearing about BTS performing at the 2017 VMAs and thinking, who? I've never heard of them. But I looked the performance up on YouTube afterwards, and I have to say, not only was I impressed with the showmanship and professional dedication to entertainment, I'm very much a believer in the Motown model, but I was pleasantly surprised, perhaps shocked even, when I listened to the song they were performing. The song in question, DNA, piqued my interest immediately on multiple fronts as a musician, creative, artist, and engineer and producer. It had hallmarks of music that was being propagated by Western artists at the time, and yet this was something entirely fresh to my ears. It had the same hyper-compressed production sheen of any other pop song in the charts of that year, but yet the musical elements were so unique. The Guns N' Roses style whistling intro, the pseudo 80s rock style guitar riff and post dubstep chorus, that incredible arm chain link dance move they did. It was all just so fresh, and honestly, not something an American artist would have or even could have come out with at the time, in my opinion. Why, I wondered. What is it about K-pop that, at least in my opinion, oftentimes makes it more musically rich and diverse in its musical and production qualities than quite a few Western artists? So with this video, I want to dive into all of that here and take a detailed look at the history, theory, and production of K-pop that gives it a sound and vibe all its own. Before we get into all the ways in which K-pop incorporates unique harmonic and melodic textures, let's take a look at its history and a brief history of the South Korean music industry in general. While the earliest traces of Korean interface with Western musical tradition can be traced back all the way to the late 19th century, the beginning of a sustained influence began when American troops stationed in the South following the partition began to share records with the local Korean soldiers and civilians. Additionally, the USO at this time brought various Western entertainers to Korea to provide entertainment for the US troops. Local Koreans often attended these concerts as well, further spreading the influence of Western popular music in Korean society. The first local Battle of the Bands was organized in Seoul in 1968, and actually, a musical singing group known as the Kim Sisters had a #7 hit in the Billboard chart in America with a cover of Charlie Brown in 1963. They also appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show over 20 times in the 60s. So South Korean music crossing the oceans of the world to reach the shores of America is not as new a phenomenon as one might think, given the long, strong bond between the two countries that they have shared since the 1950s. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, hippie culture slightly penetrated the consciousness of South Korean society, but it wasn't until the 1980s, with the rise of the ballad as a genre, that South Korea began to develop a distinctive contemporary music identity. There were numerous hits throughout South Korea at the time in this style, which took influences from American blues, 80s contemporary pop, and the Great American Songbook, to name a few. However, as the 80s turned into the 90s, the first genuine K-pop groups emerged out of South Korea and set the stage for the genre as a whole. While there were quite a few groups at the time, it was SM Entertainment, yes, that SM Entertainment group, HOT or HOT, that started the successful formula we are all familiar with today. With their debut album titled, amazingly, We Hate All Kinds of Violence, they managed to sell 1 million albums within South Korea domestically, which, considering the population at that time, was quite an achievement to say the least. And from their success, the contemporary K-pop industry as we know it today was born. So now we know roughly how K-pop got started. But in this next part, I want to focus on some of the unique musical and production aspects of the genre that caught my ear the first time I was exposed to it in 2017. The song I will be using for this breakdown will be Shinee's Prism, as an example of how the unique elements of differing influences come together to form a cohesive whole. Before we deep dive into this example, two of the most important qualities I feel distinguish K-pop from typical Western pop groups. Number one, expanded musical palette. Oftentimes in K-pop songs, you will hear instruments or combinations of instruments and effects played together in a way that is just not commonly heard in Western pop. For example, guitars mixed with strings, mixed with side-chained post-dubstep bass are some of the combinations I have heard in songs and are just one of the few unique ways K-pop producers choose to orchestrate and arrange their productions. Number two, harmonic structures. Harmony in K-pop often borrows from the jazz neo-soul template over more traditional pop harmony. Oftentimes, chords feature extensive use of tension, such as 9ths and 13ths, and use of the jazz 2/5 turnaround is far more common than you would think, and certainly far more common than in most Western pop songs. While these qualities in and of themselves may not sound too radical on their own, when mixed with the flawless hyper-compressed production, they take on a life that is similar yet again wholly different from Western pop as we are familiar with it in the United States. But enough explanation. Let's dive right into the analysis of Shinee's Prism. Let's take a listen to a piano reduction of the chord progression I've made here. So the first thing I want to focus on with Prism is the harmony. If we take a look at the chart I've made for the song, we see a 4-bar repeating loop that continues throughout more or less the entire song. As we can see from looking at these chords, they are a little more advanced than what you would typically find in a standard pop chord progression. First, it's important to note the key signature, B minor/D major, but B minor for our purposes. Now right away, let's note something important that happens within the first bar of the loop. On beat 3, we have an A minor 6 going to D7, then finally ending on G major on beat 1 of the next bar. In case you aren't familiar, within the first bar we already have a jazz 2/5 turnaround going to the chord built on the flat 6th degree of the key, G major. If you are not familiar with jazz harmony and are not familiar with what exactly a 2/5 is and how it functions, I implore you to watch one of many Adam Neely videos explaining and expanding on the subject further. The man truly is the jazz theory king of YouTube. Anyways, so after the first 2/5, which in fact involved some modal interchange due to that A minor 6 chord, we then on beat 3 of bar 2 encounter yet another jazz 2/5 turnaround, this time in a minor key version that brings us back to the home key of B minor. Finally, it all rounds off with a sharp hold on the chord of F sharp 7 flat 13 for the last half of bar 4, before rounding back to the beginning of the progression. So as you can see, when you combine all these extended chords together in a coherent form of jazz harmony, you get a sound that is just, in my opinion, much more lush, open, and full than that of the standard pop chord progression. Don't know what I'm talking about? Here's a video.
Yeah, that's Don't Stop Believing by Journey. And the cast of Glee.
However, a snazzy chord progression is not enough on its own to make a song vital and interesting. So it's important now we take a look at the production elements of Prism to see how K-pop uses and manipulates different styles of productions to create something unique. The first thing to note is the rhythmic backbone of Prism. If we analyze it, we see a strong UK garage 90s house style drums driving the song forward. Right off the bat, the influence of house music, as opposed to hip-hop being the primary rhythmic foundation, gives the song a different feel right off the bat. And while I would never deny that K-pop certainly has a strong hip-hop influence, one of the things in my mind that distinguishes it from Western pop artists is the co-equal footing house music has with hip-hop in terms of primacy of use in rhythmic structures. After the rhythmic structures, I think it's important to note some of the more general creative things done with the arrangement that mark Prism as an example of K-pop's consistent thirst for new approaches to contemporary pop music. Let's take a listen back to the chorus. Did you hear it? While our foundational chord loop is still implied, the producers of this song took the bold step to actually remove the Fender Rhodes that was supplying the harmony throughout the rest of the song out of the chorus figure. Subsequently, we are left with just the Boys of Shinee's vocal lines and ad-libs to outline and imply the chord progression, but again, the harmony is never outright stated in a polyphonic instrument like a keyboard. While this might not seem of great importance, to me as a producer, it strikes me as supremely creative to simultaneously take elements out of the chorus, thereby signaling we may be taking a drier and smaller approach, only to be met with a burst of vocal ad-libs and vocal interjections, which subverts our expectations of a toned-down chorus in favor of a more exuberant one, only with totally different sonic elements. So again, it's these little production moves that to me separate K-pop away from many Western pop artists in the mainstream. One last thing to note, while these chord progressions are colorful and rich in harmonics texture, it is not the first time they have appeared in pop music. In fact, as I was listening to a lot of K-pop tracks for this video, a thought came to my head, didn't we used to have songs in the Western pop canon that sounded more like this? And then I came across this video of the production team, The Stereotypes, talking about the production they did on the Red Velvet song, Bad Boy.
I went back to 90s R&B.
It's just fun, like, because, like, especially when they're allowing you to do that. It was pretty tough just being in the States, playing music like that, or music that we grew up listening to and elements that we loved and would love to incorporate, but it wasn't, like, you know, received well.
In the States, it's not always accepted, you know, and aside from artists like, for instance, like Bruno, you know, but even still, that was taking a chance. It would be difficult to hear this song on the radio in the States.
As I suspected, many of the more rich chord progressions common in the 90s, for whatever reason, have fallen out of favor with American record companies. And one of the reasons why this style of writing may have cropped up more in K-pop than in the West is simply due to a fact that for whatever reason, there appears to be more openness at the moment to this approach in Korea than in America. So, in summation, K-pop is a very different beast than Western pop. Without even getting into the unique fan culture that dominates K-pop, it's pretty clear that often K-pop's musical footprint is similar, though in many ways unique, to Western pop. From heavy metal to jazz to neo-soul to warped electronic productions with pop melodies, K-pop's incorporation and unique fusions of diverse genres, coupled with its intense fan fervor, ensures that it's a presence in international consciousness that will remain for the decades to come. I hope you take the time to check out some of the most popular K-pop songs out there now and of the last 5 years. It really is a rewarding musical experience that's hard to describe, and as a producer and a musician, I really believe there's a lot you can learn. So go listen to a K-pop song. It'll do your musical brain some good.